August 21st, 1955 had been a typically hot summer day in the western Kentucky farming community of Kelly. Inside the modest farmhouse of Ms. Glennie Lankford, 11 people settled in for an evening of card games and conversation, oblivious to the bizarre turn of events lurking around the proverbial corner. Among them were 3 children from Ms. Lankford's most recent marriage, 12-year-old Lonnie, 10-year-old Carlton, and 7-year-old Mary. Her 2 older sons were there as well, 25-year-old Lucky Sutton and his 21-year-old brother John Charlie, along with their respective wives Vera and Aileen. Also visiting were Aileen Sutton's brother, O.P. Baker, and Lucky's best friends who had driven down from Pennsylvania for the weekend, Billy Ray and June Taylor. At about 7 p.m., Billy Ray decided to leave his wife and friends and walk the short distance to the farm's well pump to fetch a bucket of water, as the house had no indoor plumbing, a fact not atypical of the era. Everyone was startled a few moments later when Billy Ray returned, walked into the house, and announced that he had just witnessed a round object trailing all the colors of the rainbow pass overhead and descend toward a field about a city block away. The universal response was of incredulity, even laughter. Both Ms. Lankford and June assured Billy Ray he had seen a shooting star. Lucky told him to forget about the matter altogether. A half hour after sunset, around 8 p.m., Ms. Lankford's dog, which was outside at the time, began to bark furiously at something in the thickening night. Lucky, John Charlie, and Billy Ray looked out into the front yard, recent events suddenly in the forefront of the latter's mind. As the men stepped out onto the front porch to get a better view, the dog dashed beneath the house, tail between its legs. It would stay there until the afternoon of the following day. A few surreal moments passed as a glowing figure emerged from the trees, described later by Miss Lankford and her adult sons as a little man about 3 feet tall with huge glowing yellow eyes, enormous bat-like ears, and disproportionately large hands on arms so long they almost dragged on the ground. The creature appeared to be wearing a tight metallic suit, and it glowed with a silvery green aura the entire time it was within view. As the little figure drew closer to the farmhouse, traversing the yard with an awkward, stiff-legged gait, it raised its long arms in a strange, incomprehensible gesture. Not finding themselves in a diplomatic mood, Lucky quickly grabbed a 20-gauge shotgun for himself and a .22 caliber starter pistol for his friend, weapons normally reserved by Ms. Lankford for the occasional vermin. They loaded the weapons, and as the creature drew to within about 8 to 10 yards, Lucky opened fire. To the men's amazement, the creature reacted by performing a backward somersault and dashing off into the night. The mood of the house devolved rapidly into a whirlwind of fear and confusion as Ms. Lankford and the wives attempted to determine the cause for the men's alarm. Billy Ray took station at the back door, pistol in hand, as Lucky and John Charlie kept watch out the front. Ms. Lankford sent the children to bed as soon as Lucky stammered something about otherworldly goblins. Unsure whether it was all an elaborate joke, she went to the back of the house to ask Billy Ray about the cause for all the commotion, to which he replied, "Miss Glennie, I hope you don't find out." Ms. Lankford and Billy Ray sat quietly in dining chairs and waited, listening to everyone in the front of the house chatter nervously. Hearing 7-year-old Mary crying from the bedroom, Ms. Lankford rose from her chair, only to find herself screaming at the sight of a little glowing creature in the doorway. Billy Ray reacted by firing through the screen door. Like the one before it, the creature simply tumbled away and darted off. Everyone came running as Billy Ray stepped outside onto the rear porch to see if he could determine the creature's whereabouts. No sooner had the door clacked shut behind him than did a clawed hand reach down from the roof above and graze his hair. As Aileen quickly grabbed Billy Ray to yank him clear of the claw's grasp, Lucky tore past his friend and fired at a creature crouched on the roof. The creature rolled off onto the ground and scurried away toward the woods. Back in the living room, someone, possibly John Charlie, alerted everyone to another creature pressing his face against the window screen in an attempt to peer inside the house. Lucky and Billy Ray both fired, and the creature quickly retreated. At this point, Aileen, June, and Vera went into the bedroom to console the children and offer them what little protection they could. John Charlie took charge of the .22 and waited anxiously in the living room with O.P. and Miss Lankford. Lucky and Billy Ray, certain they had hit the creature in the window, went out into the front yard to assess the damage. As soon as they stepped outside, someone shouted to look toward the maple tree, where a little silvery man was perched on a lower limb. Lucky fired at it and presumably hit it, but instead of falling, the creature seemed to float to the ground before running off. Almost at once, another creature rounded the nearest corner of the house. Again, Lucky fired point blank, his shot hitting something metallic, the sound later described by Billy Ray as akin to a handful of bullets rattling around a tin bucket. As before, the creature tumbled away, seemingly unharmed. Their gunfire ineffective, the men returned to the house to regroup and plan their next move. Ms. Lankford then pointed out that the creatures hadn't yet tried to hurt them, but as the rest of the family were in a near panic, her words fell on deaf ears. Eventually, someone discovered that whenever the creatures appeared at a window and a bright light was shown, they seemed to shy away. The adults quickly turned on every light in the house and waited. At least an hour or two passed, the eerie silence broken only by the children's crying and the occasional scratching noise on the roof. Finally building their courage, the men and women gathered the 3 children and piled into a pair of trucks parked a few yards away from the front door. Just after 11 p.m., the family arrived at the Hopkinsville police station about 6 miles to the north. The desk sergeant listened to Billy Ray's recounting of the hours-long standoff with Little Silver Men, and though understandably skeptical, did note that the family all seemed very frightened. The sergeant decided to phone Police Chief Russell Greenwall, who in turn contacted the Kentucky State Police, the Christian County Sheriff, and the Fort Campbell Army Base, which sent 4 military police to assist in a search of the farm in case the Little Silver Men turned out to be decidedly more terrestrial and armed. Using flashlights, a dozen officers from all the participating agencies walked the farm, attempting to find any sign of intruders or a gun battle. Some shell casings were located, but no sign of footprints or landed spacecraft were ever seen. There was very little to corroborate the claims of Miss Lankford, the Suttons, or the Taylors, though officers were sure to question each of them separately in an attempt to discover any inconsistencies in their story. No inconsistencies were found. The 11 people of the Lankford household seemed to be sincere. By the early morning of the 22nd, the entourage of police officers and army personnel left, the matter more or less closed. Still badly shaken, Ms. Lankford, her family, and guests did their best to get some sleep. At about 3:30 a.m., Ms. Lankford awoke to the sight of one of the creatures staring at her through her bedroom window. She cried out to Lucky, who was napping fitfully on the living room couch. On went the lights, and out came the guns, though no shots were fired this time. Just before daybreak, the creature's face slipped away from the window for the last time, never to be seen again. The morning following the incident, 2 officers returned for a second daylight search. Subsequently, reporters, UFO investigators, curiosity seekers, and fanatics began to descend on the farmhouse, including a U.S. Air Force representative investigating the case for Project Blue Book. Like the classic children's game Telephone, what is known about the event has been exaggerated and embellished after hundreds of retellings. It would not be inaccurate to say the story has in fact become a bit of country folklore, a legend told around a campfire. But like most legends and tall tales, there is a blade of truth among the weeds. What exactly did the Lankford Suttons encounter that hot August night in rural Kentucky? Did they in fact see anything at all? In service of an answer, an accounting of known facts and reasonable deductions can be codified. A bright meteor was reported on the night in question by independent witnesses in the area. A spacecraft possibly, but the Kappa Cygnus meteor shower was occurring at that time, and what Billy Ray observed could very well have been something more prosaic. Nevertheless, his claim to have seen a UFO was, from his perspective, correct and truthful. Oddly, the claim made by Billy Ray that the object in question landed in a nearby field is not the result of later dramatic distortions. The Kentucky New Era published Billy Ray's account in an article the day following the initial event. Although this could be an exaggeration on Billy Ray's part, a perceived landing would not necessarily be at odds with an honest misidentification, as a bright meteor can appear to be much closer than it really is, and appear to be stationary when viewed against a dark backdrop. It is important to note not all those in the farmhouse were direct witnesses. None of the children, for example, ever claimed to have seen anything unusual outside their own bedroom window, though the children's distress, as well as some of the more suggestible adults, could have been the result of the projected anxiety of others in the house. An outside stimulus, the exact nature of which is open to speculation, is the only explanation, aside from outright fabrication, of Lucky and Billy Ray's fearful behavior. That they may have overreacted to said stimulus isn't the issue. It is an indisputable fact that when the 11 people in question arrived at the Hopkinsville police station, the desk sergeant noted they were all very distraught. Also, all accounts indicate whatever they had witnessed had briefly returned early the following morning. A neighbor who lived about a quarter mile to the north reported hearing a total of 4 shots. He also claimed to have seen a distant light in the trees between his property and the Lankford house, as well as having heard men shouting. At first, he assumed a pig had escaped and the men were looking for it. After he heard gunfire, he assumed Ms. Lankford's sons were chasing off a bobcat that had been lingering in the area. Of these 4 confirmed shots, the first was likely at the creature's initial appearance at the front of the house. The second likely originated from inside the house when a creature appeared in the doorway. The third likely came when Lucky fired at the creature perched on the roof. And the fourth when Lucky shot at another creature in a tree. There was almost certainly a 5th and 6th shot unreported by the neighbor, the attempt to dissuade the peeping Tom, and the point-blank discharge as a creature rounded the corner of the house. Relatively speaking, neither a 20-gauge shotgun nor a .22 caliber is a particularly loud firearm, so it is possible the shots fired from within the house at the window were somewhat absorbed by the walls. It is also possible the neighbor could have been inside his own house during unconfirmed shots, and thus not have heard them or have interpreted them incorrectly. At one point during an interview, the neighbor even wondered if the gunshots he had heard had in fact been firecrackers. But even if the amount of confirmed shots were doubled, it would hardly imply the war zone described in some of the more hyperbolic retellings. Nearly every account states this detail, and most only mention it happening once. This is less mysterious than it first seems. A small farm is undoubtedly home to tin buckets, tools, sheet metal, and various pieces of hardware. Faced with a bizarre circumstance, even at point-blank range, Billy Ray or Lucky could have missed their target and sent a bullet into an unrelated object. How Billy Ray did not soil himself at this moment is anyone's guess, but as salacious as this detail is, it has been reported in practically every version of the story and does not seem at odds with some of the explanations. As many as 15 creatures are often said to have surrounded the house. This figure should be taken with an enormous grain of salt, as it's the one detail that is both the easiest to alter and carries the most dramatic weight. Although admittedly not a witness, Geraldine Stith, daughter of Lucky Sutton, has stated that her father had only estimated 3 or 4 total assailants. In fact, a careful study of the events indicates only 1 creature was ever seen at any one time, though in some versions, 2 creatures were simultaneously seen in the tree and coming around the corner of the house. Officially, the U.S. Air Force classified the Kelly-Hopkinsville case as unidentified CP, CP standing for crackpot, though unofficially, many in the investigative business concluded the entire affair to be an outright hoax perpetrated by the family themselves. Upon later reviewing the case, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, noted astronomer and Air Force UFO investigator, dismissed the event as, quote, preposterous and offensive to common sense, unquote. There was good reason to believe this. According to later statements, Lucky and Billy Ray had a reputation for being practical jokers. This is corroborated by the fact that the family didn't at first believe Billy Ray's claim of seeing a UFO, thinking it to be just one of his pranks. One version of the story even has Billy Ray's wife, June, laughingly refuse to defend him against the ridicule of the rest of the household. According to contemporary investigator Isabel Davis, quote, even among the family, Billy Ray had a low standing. During the investigations, he basked in the limelight. He elaborated and embroidered his description of the creatures. His behavior was in sharp contrast to that of the other witnesses, none of whom aroused such prompt suspicion, unquote. Lucky and Billy Ray both worked for a traveling carnival, a job that undoubtedly required some knowledge of human psychology, as well as the art of deception and exaggeration. If viewed in the narrow context of the two men's talents and experience, an elaborate hoax seems possible, if not plausible. The idea of a hoax is further bolstered by the oddly convenient lack of physical evidence at the farm. No footprints were ever found, nor any traces of a landed object in the field behind the house. The nighttime investigation did discover a small patch of something on or near a fence that luminesced, but rather than support the supposition of it being blood left by a wounded entity, general consensus is the substance was nothing more than foxfire, a bioluminescent fungal growth common to that area of the country. The daylight investigation only noted a small, though not insignificant, roughly circular hole in a screen. Curiously, there is never a mention of a broken window, the existence of which would seem probable given the typical narrative. This is in light of the observation of reporter Joe Doris, who stated that 7-year-old Mary seemed to have a great deal of trouble controlling her cat, which had ripped up one of the other screens in the house sometime before. A cat could have been responsible for the hole, but it could just as easily have been made by a .22 caliber bullet or the diminutive spread from a 20-gauge shotgun at close range. Considering the frightened state in which the family was when they entered the Hopkinsville police station, it is hard to imagine that any of them were putting on a show simply for their own entertainment. Moreover, if only Billy Ray and or Lucky were in on the joke, they would likely have reconsidered the whole endeavor once the rest of the family decided to get the local authorities involved, as they would risk being responsible for filing a false statement and the misuse of police resources. It's also unlikely anyone in the family would knowingly terrorize 3 young children to such a degree, a point made all the clearer when considering the lifelong trauma felt by some of the family members. In later years, Geraldine Stith recalled that after the appearance of the Goblins, Ms. Lankford sold the farmhouse which she had lived in for decades and moved into town to feel safe, and that her Uncle John Charlie, quote, couldn't hold down a job anymore. It psychologically messed with him, unquote. One alternative possibility is the Lankford household was the innocent victim of an outside prank. Though wooded, the Kelly-Hopkinsville area of Kentucky is very flat, hardly the kind of tumulus terrain seen in the stereotypical depiction of hillbilly country. Aside from the occasional hollow choked with greenery, there is very little cover for a clandestine tomfoolery. When one considers other logistical difficulties in setting up an elaborate system of mannequins that move and respond to the family's actions, this seems nearly as hard to believe as a genuine invasion by little silvery men from space. How would a prankster know a meteor was going to be in the sky at the precise moment Billy Ray had stepped outside? The meteor was undoubtedly the prima mobile of the entire event. If Billy Ray hadn't seen the meteor, it is likely neither he nor anyone else in the house would have assumed the curious creatures were from a spaceship, and thus been in a more rational frame of mind to determine what exactly was going on. Also, would someone really risk their own lives to frighten a family of simple farm folk? In that era, every house within 1,000 miles had a firearm on hand. The idea that someone clever enough to convincingly pull off such a devilish ruse would not reconsider once they realized they could be shot in the process seems ludicrous. Another possibility is that the events were objectively true. Though an intellectually honest position, this seems at odds with common sense. Would a bunch of interstellar explorers from a technological species that conquered the non-trivial problem of deep space travel spend whatever precious time they had on Earth scaring a bunch of natives? Of course, who's to say they weren't extraterrestrial teenagers out for a night of mischief? Imagine a pack of high schoolers awake and bored at midnight, and the idea seems less outlandish. There is no concrete reason to believe space goblins actually invaded the farm, but there is also no physical evidence which would point to any other explanation. On the contrary, the behavior of Ms. Lankford and her family during and after the events attest to its veracity. Could Lucky, Billy Ray, and the others have been the victims of hallucination, perhaps brought on by drugs or alcohol? Kentucky State Trooper R.N. Ferguson considered this possibility during the initial search of the farm, noting that many monsters come in a container. A visitor the following morning also pointed out a few beer cans in a rubbish basket. A telling find, perhaps, but it should be noted that neither the desk sergeant at the Hopkinsville police station nor any other investigative party observed any intoxication of anyone involved. Years later, Joanne Smithy, chairperson of the Kelly Little Greenman Days Festival, stated in regards to the claim, quote, "We all laugh at that because Glennie didn't allow alcohol or even cursing on her property," unquote. A few empty beer cans of indeterminate age or origin hardly implies a night of half-blind revelry. It is simply easier to take Ms. Lankford and her family at their word. In 1957, Air Force Major John E. Albert concluded the residents of the Lankford farm had misidentified a monkey painted silver that had escaped from a nearby circus or carnival. As ridiculous as this explanation sounds, it was an attempt to reconcile known facts with the apparent sincerity of the witnesses. Recall that Lucky and Billy Ray were carnival workers. Perhaps after escaping, a monkey had followed someone it knew and unintentionally gave everyone a night to remember. Unfortunately, no credible evidence exists for such an escape, leaving the mystery more or less untouched. In 2001, French UFO researcher Renauld Leclet proposed another theory involving the misidentification of animals. Leclet hypothesized that the family actually witnessed 1 or 2 eagle owls, also known as great horned owls, and mistook them for something decidedly stranger. At first, this may seem as hard to accept as a silver-painted circus monkey, but the idea is actually far more serviceable when considered along with the order of events. A nocturnal raptor, great horned owls are found all over the United States, particularly in sparsely wooded areas, such as that found in western Kentucky and Indiana, where the trees make ideal places to nest and the large open expanses are good for aerial hunting. They average just under 2 feet in height, with a wingspan at least twice as long, which is in keeping with the family's later recollection of the creature's size, given a reasonable error due to nighttime viewing, and the possibility of a somewhat larger than average specimen. The feather plumicorns on the owls' heads are quite prominent, and could be mistaken for ears in low-light conditions. Their eyes are highly reflective, and are generally a deep yellow in color, again matching descriptions. Unlike many birds, great horned owls will often hunt smaller game on foot, walking awkwardly along the ground. They have even been known to prey upon small cats and dogs in this manner. If an owl had approached the farmhouse with its wings at its sides, its gait would be comparatively strange next to more terrestrial animals, appearing as though its hands nearly dragged on the ground. The feathers of great horned owls can, under the right conditions, be home to a bioluminescent fungus similar to foxfire, which glows softly at night. This glow has been described as white, silvery, or silvery green. If Billy Ray had seen a bright meteor and misjudged its distance and general nature, he would have planted the seeds of uncritical belief in the minds of the others, even if the others found his initial observation unbelievable. Once Lucky, Billy Ray, and John Charlie spotted the inexplicable form, the owl, emerge from the tree line, they logically associated the form with the witnessed UFO. The owl then walked along the ground for some distance, not a behavior generally associated with a bird. This behavior, coupled with the unusual bioluminescent glow emanating from its body and the poor visibility of the night, would force Billy Ray and his friends to conclude something truly supernatural was afoot. Moreover, the behavior of Ms. Lankford's dog cannot be ignored. The dog may have simply interpreted the owl for what it was and realized it was itself in danger. Its understandable behavior therefore reinforced the family's heightened sense of trepidation. Great horned owls typically nest in mated pairs between January and late October, raising their young within tree cavities, man-made structures, or caves, and will aggressively chase away threats. If a pair of mated owls had nested in the nearby trees and had witnessed Billy Ray as he went out to the pump at twilight, a time which happens to coincide with a nocturnal animal's period of heightened activity, the owls could have construed him as an encroaching threat. In a bizarre bit of irony, the owls may have approached the farm in an attempt to drive away strange interlopers, while Billy Ray and his fellow humans defended themselves from the same. Despite their reputation, owls are not particularly bright, and may have even seen the Lankford house as another nest, and pressed their attack for the good of their young, looking into available openings and even grabbing one of the occupants by the hair. The violent response of the men only serves to confirm the owl's courage born of dim-wittedness. Animals of higher intelligence probably would have gotten the hint and made themselves scarce at the first blast of a shotgun. In the end, whatever explanation given for the Hopkinsville Goblins must be labeled as speculation and nothing more. What is true is the story of the Hopkinsville Goblins has become part of the cultural consciousness, aspects being the inspiration for dozens of movies, games, and civic events. Perhaps the Lankford household had seen something truly unexplainable. Perhaps they had seen something ordinary, and through misinterpretation, literally created a living nightmare. Whatever the answer, we would do well to remember that, be it impending attack from space goblins, or being a toy for our own subconscious, none of us are immune to the fickle processes of the human mind.